In my past life I gave up everything to marry him. My education, my dreams, my dignity. He gave me betrayal, silence, and another woman in my bed. When I died, even my own children told me to let him go. But fate gave me one more chance. This time I won't wait for him to leave me. This time I'll leave first and never look back. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I noticed was the calendar. It was a year I thought I had left behind. A date I had once circled with innocent anticipation. The week before my engagement to Caleb Hart. I sat up slowly, staring at my surroundings. The pale blue walls. The stiff pillow. The desk scattered with high school textbooks. Everything was exactly as it had been. Except me. In my previous life, this was the week when everything began to end. I had given up university to marry Caleb. I had told myself love was worth more than ambition. I had believed the promises he whispered under street lamps and behind closed doors. And I had paid for it, with my time, my identity, my self-respect. But now, I had been given a second chance. And this time I would not waste it on a man who never saw me as his first choice. The acceptance letter lay on the table beside me, thick, crisp, stamped with the gold seal of Westwood Technical University, located all the way across the country. In my past life I had torn it up without a second glance, too busy preparing wedding invitations. This time I held it as if it were my freedom. As it was. I had secretly changed my university preference during the final submission window, picking the furthest institution available with a strong engineering department. No one knew, not my teachers, not Caleb, and certainly not the Wongs, his adoptive parents, and my late parents' closest friends. Even now my homeroom teacher didn't understand. "You switched to Westwood?" she asked that afternoon, frowning slightly as we stood near the administrative office. "Didn't you say your fiancé is staying here to teach next semester?" I smiled, polite but distant. "Free love is the trend now, Miss Xiao. Childhood engagements feel a bit outdated, don't they?" She blinked, surprised. "Well, I suppose they are. But I didn't expect you to say that." "People change," I replied, letting the words hang there like a quiet promise. She gave me a long look, then patted my arm. "Well, good for you. I hope you know what you're doing." So did I. After school I walked back slowly, choosing the long route home. My shoes crunched over gravel as I passed the gates of Caleb's military academy. A few cadets jogged by, their uniforms crisp, their eyes focused ahead. Somewhere inside, Caleb was likely finishing drills or giving instructions. In my old life I would have waited near the gates, watching him through the bars like a loyal dog. Now I turned my face the other way. Our apartment wasn't much. A two-bedroom provided by the Wongs. They had taken me in after my parents died, and because of the engagement between our families, I had simply slipped into the role of a future daughter-in-law. The space was tidy but never felt like mine. Every picture frame still held someone else's photo. Every cabinet was arranged the way Mrs. Wong liked it. When I opened the door that afternoon, the air inside was warm, heavy with the scent of boiling soup and freshly steamed rice. I paused. I hadn't cooked. The sound of laughter drifted from the kitchen. A child's voice. Then a woman's. I didn't even need to look to know who it was. Marilyn. Her voice was soft, sweet, and honey-coated with just enough breathlessness to seem innocent. In my previous life she had been just a family friend. A war widow with a young daughter. She had said she had nowhere else to go. Caleb had promised to look after her for his fallen comrade's sake. By the end of that life they had built a home together, without me in it. I walked into the living room, slow and silent. There they were. Mira, glowing in a red coat, her cheeks flushed prettily. Her daughter, Elise, sitting on a stool and stirring soup as if she lived there. Mira turned and smiled as if nothing was wrong. "Sister-in-law," she greeted, as though the word didn't scrape against my skin. "I hope you don't mind. Elise and I were just nearby and thought we'd drop in." She missed Uncle Caleb's cooking. I didn't respond. Elise looked up at me with wide, judging eyes, far too sharp for a 3-year-old. She turned back to the stove and ladled out 3 bowls of food, one for herself, one for her mother, and one she placed carefully at Caleb's seat at the table. None for me. I leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly. There was a time when I would have felt ashamed. When I would have tried to win them over with kindness, with patience, with another dish cooked to perfection. But not anymore. Now I was just counting days. I returned to my room and opened the small box under the bed. Inside were things no one else cared about. embroidered pillowcases, hand-stitched baby shoes I had once dreamt of giving to my future child, pieces of a life I never lived. One by one I folded them into a small cloth bag. The next day I walked to the pawn shop near the intersection and laid everything out on the counter. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. 30 yuan, he said, pushing the coins toward me. I took them without hesitation. Back at the apartment I marked a large red X on the calendar. 23 days. 23 days until the semester began. Until I could leave for Westwood. Until I could start a life no longer defined by Caleb Hart or Mira Lynn, or a daughter who would one day spit the word mother-in-law like a curse. That night I returned home late on purpose. The apartment was quiet. Mira and Elise were gone for now. The soup on the stove had gone cold. I ignored it. Caleb returned just before midnight. I heard the door creak open, the rustle of his uniform, the familiar sigh he always gave when he thought I was asleep. But I wasn't. He lingered outside my room as if unsure whether to knock. I waited, heart still but hands clenched under the blanket. Then he spoke. I submitted the marriage report today. They've scheduled the registration for the 9th of next month. Is that okay? The 9th. The same date as in my past life. A beat of silence passed. Then I answered, voice steady. Marriage is a big deal. I'll go back and ask my family first. Another pause. He didn't press. His footsteps retreated down the hallway. I sat up, eyes fixed on the calendar again. Tomorrow I would pack for my trip to the village. Tomorrow I would speak to the Wongs, the people who had taken me in and trusted me like a daughter, and tell them the truth. That I no longer wanted to marry Caleb. That I was leaving for university. That this engagement, this life, was over. I woke up early the next morning, the faint scent of dew filtering in through the open window. The calendar on the wall stared back at me with its heavy red X marks. Only 22 days left. I folded my clothes quietly, packing just enough for a few days back in the village. There was no way I could break off the engagement without facing the Wongs directly. In our community, childhood promises weren't something to be tossed aside casually. Engagements were considered sacred, sealed with tokens witnessed by family elders and tied with more than just sentiment. And yet I was ready to walk away from it all. As I packed, I came across a bundle of fabric tucked in the drawer. The pillowcases I had embroidered last winter, the hand-stitched slippers I made during the blackout week, the red scarf I never had the chance to give Caleb. Every stitch was woven with a version of myself I no longer wanted to be. I tied the items into a cloth bundle and headed down to the pawn shop near the street corner. The shopkeeper barely looked up when I placed the stack on the counter. 30 yuan, he said, his voice bored. It wasn't much. But enough to help with meals during the trip and maybe a little to stash aside once school began. When I returned to the apartment, I marked another bold X on the calendar. 21 days left. As I stirred the rice on the stove that evening, I reminded myself I wasn't obligated to act like a wife. I wasn't married. Not yet. I owed no one dinners, explanations, or patience. Still, old habits die hard. I cooked out of instinct. Eggplant with chili, steamed cabbage with ginger, a simple tofu soup. Food was neutral. Food didn't betray you. Or so I thought. Just as I was plating the food, the front door opened with the loud clatter of enthusiasm. We're back. Myra's voice sang through the apartment like a songbird that refused to stop chirping. I turned my head slowly and saw her step in, her cheeks flushed from the cold, a bright red scarf wrapped around her neck. Elise skipped beside her, dragging her tiny boots across the clean floor. I hope we're not intruding, Mira said sweetly, removing her coat. Elise begged to come by. She didn't wait for an answer. The next moments unfolded with eerie familiarity. Elise hopped onto the kitchen stool like it was hers. Mira peeked into the pot on the stove as if she had been cooking it herself. Then, without permission, Elise began ladling the soup into bowls. 3 of them. She didn't even glance at me. I said nothing. I didn't stop her. I didn't serve myself. Instead, I stood at the doorway and watched. They sat down at the table, Caleb included. He had arrived moments before them. All 3 began eating cheerfully, Mira chatting about Elise's latest school drawing, Caleb nodding, Elise giggling with her mouth full. A family portrait. Then it happened. All 3 spat out their food nearly in unison. Bleck. It's so salty. Elise cried, scrunching her nose. Mira coughed into her napkin. Oh dear, Maybe too much soy sauce? Caleb stood up quickly and poured a glass of water for Mira, then reached for the soup to soothe Elise's burning mouth. I leaned back slightly, still silent. The look on Caleb's face was half confused, half accusing, as if he was slowly piecing together that this wasn't an accident. "Leah," he said, turning to me. "Did you?" I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He hesitated, unsure whether to push. Mira stood slowly, dabbing her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said softly, addressing Caleb, not me. "I knew we shouldn't have come. Sister-in-law clearly doesn't welcome us. I won't come again. I promise." And like a rehearsed performance, she took Elise's hand, gave Caleb a sorrowful glance, and left the apartment in tears. The door clicked shut. Only then did Caleb turn fully toward me. "You did that on purpose," he said flatly. I returned to the kitchen and began making a fresh pot of soup. He followed me in. Myra's husband was my closest friend. He gave his life in the line of duty. I made a promise to look after them. "And Elise, she's just a child. You want to care for her," I said quietly, "then care for her. No one's stopping you." His brows furrowed. "You're a good cook, Leah. You always have been. You know Elise loves your food." I didn't respond. He rubbed the back of his neck, the tension thick between us. Then finally, reluctantly, he softened. "Fine. If you don't like them visiting, I won't invite them anymore." But we both knew that was a lie. He had never needed to invite them. They always came anyway. The next morning I woke to the smell of fried eggs and treasure porridge. I walked out of my room to find Caleb in the kitchen plating breakfast. His hair was still damp from the shower, and the military jacket on the back of the chair looked freshly pressed. "Morning," he greeted casually. "I figured you'd be leaving for the village today. Made your favorites." I sat down slowly. It was strange, this softness. It reminded me of how things used to be back when we were still just two students walking home after study sessions. Before promises became shackles. Before I stopped being seen. We ate in silence for a few minutes. Then he spoke again. "I'll take time off and drive you." I looked up, startled. "You shouldn't go alone," he added, his tone calm but firm. "I'll manage." He frowned slightly, but before he could say more, the door burst open. "Daddy!" Elise ran in, arms wide, her pink butterfly clips bouncing as she threw herself into his lap. "Hey, sweetheart. What are you doing here?" Caleb asked, surprised but smiling. "Mama said Auntie doesn't like her, so she didn't dare come," Elise replied without shame, glancing at me with cautious eyes. My hands stilled over my chopsticks. Caleb's smile faltered. "Where is your mom now?" Elise shrugged. "Said she wasn't feeling well. She's resting." He stood up. "I'll take her back. Mira must be worried." Of course. He didn't even finish breakfast. He just grabbed his coat, lifted Elise into his arms, and headed for the door. He looked over his shoulder as if remembering I existed. "Lock up after yourself." Then he left. No apology. No explanation. I sat in the quiet kitchen watching the steam curl up from my untouched porridge. Across the table, Elise's chair still held her scarf. Her voice still echoed in my head. "Auntie doesn't like her. If only that child knew the half of it." I stood up, crossed to the calendar, and pressed a red X over today's square. 20 days. That's all that remained. That afternoon I bundled the rest of my textbooks and notes, planning to sell them too. I had no reason to keep anything from this place. The life I had once imagined here was gone. Outside, I walked past the local pawn shop again and earned 13 yuan for the stack. As I clutched the bills in my coat pocket, I felt strangely calm. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't scared. I was just ready. Tomorrow I'd leave for the village. And by tomorrow night, the engagement between me and Caleb Hart would be nothing more than a memory. The morning I left for the village was overcast. The air smelled of wet earth and the ground was still soft from last night's rain. I slung my bag over my shoulder and tightened the strap. My entire life fit in that worn canvas pack. 2 changes of clothes, a notebook, my remaining money, and the university acceptance letter tucked safely inside a plastic sleeve. As I stepped outside the apartment, I hesitated. Caleb hadn't returned home the night before. Or maybe he had, quietly after I fell asleep. Either way, he didn't try to stop me. That suited me just fine. The bus to the village took 4 hours, rattling along winding mountain roads and past dusty fields still glistening with dew. I stared out the window, watching the telephone wires dip and rise like a heartbeat. The memories came slowly. The first time I arrived here as a teenager, I had been holding my mother's hand. We'd come to visit the Wongs during Spring Festival. Back then, Caleb was still a distant boy with big dreams and quiet charm. I had been told we were promised, but it didn't feel real until his mother slipped a silver bracelet onto my wrist and said, "One day this will be your home." Now I was returning to break that promise. When I reached the village entrance, Mr. Wong was already waiting by the old banyan tree, leaning against his bicycle and waving. "Leah, look at you, so grown up. You've lost weight. Are you eating enough in the city?" I forced a small smile. "I'm fine, uncle. Just tired." He took my bag and led me up the gravel path toward their courtyard. Mrs. Wong greeted me with a warm hug, ushering me inside and setting out snacks within seconds. "I made your favorite peanut sesame balls. And don't worry, you're staying in Caleb's old room. It's got a fresh quilt." I sat quietly, waiting for the right moment. They talked about the neighbors. About crops. About the neighbor's cow giving birth. I nodded politely through it all, my chest tight with the weight of the thing I hadn't said. Finally, when we sat down to dinner, I spoke. "I'd like to talk to you both about the engagement." The chopsticks in Mrs. Wong's hand froze mid-air. Mr. Wong leaned back slightly, the warmth draining from his face. "What about it?" "I'd like to annul it," I said softly but firmly. "Before I leave for university." A long silence stretched across the table. Mrs. Wong was the first to speak. "Leah, has Caleb done something to upset you?" "No." "Then why now?" she asked, voice tight. "Why after all these years? Your parents gave us their trust. We raised you like a daughter." "I know," I said. "I'll always be grateful. But this isn't what I want anymore." Mr. Wong placed his chopsticks down with a quiet clack. "Even if his heart has wandered, you are still the one he's bound to. If Caleb refuses to marry you, I'll drag him back myself. I won't let him throw you away like—" "I'm the one ending it," I interrupted gently. Mrs. Wong's eyes welled with unshed tears. "But why? What aren't you telling us?" I lowered my head. I wanted to tell them. I wanted to tell them about the lifetime of being cast aside. About the nights I stayed up alone nursing a feverish child while Caleb laughed at someone else's dinner table. About how, in the end, even my son told me to leave. But I didn't. How could I explain a life I hadn't lived yet? Instead, I said, "I've been accepted into Westwood Technical University. It's far and I want to build my own future. I'm not a good match for Caleb. He's destined for more. It's better for both of us this way." Another long silence. Then Mr. Wong sighed. "If your mind is made up, we'll go to the council." I nodded gratefully. The next morning the air was crisp and smelled faintly of wood smoke. We walked together to the village council hall, a whitewashed building with moss along its foundation and faded red banners hanging from the eaves. 5 elders sat around the circular stone table, their faces lined with years and judgment. One of them, Elder Jing, adjusted his spectacles and looked me over. "You want to annul the engagement?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "And you, Mr. Wong?" "Mrs. Wong?" "You agree?" Mr. Wong nodded slowly. "If that's what Leah wants, then we support her." I reached into my bag and placed the engagement tokens on the table. A red silk pouch with a gold-threaded knot. A silver bracelet. A jade pendant. They look so small now. Once they had felt heavy with fate. The eldest among them unfolded a certificate. "Then by village tradition the engagement between Leah Tan and Caleb Hart is hereby dissolved. You're both free to marry as you choose." He handed me the document. I bowed slightly in respect and took it with both hands. It was done. Outside the sky had cleared. The wind carried the scent of pine and something else, freedom. I helped the Wongs walk back home, neither of us speaking much. They had aged since I last saw them with clear eyes. Their backs bent more than I remembered. Their steps slower. When we reached the doorstep, Mrs. Wong touched my arm. "You'll always be family," she said, her voice rough. "Even if you're not our daughter-in-law." I nodded, my throat tight. "Where are you going now?" Mr. Wong asked. "I'll stay for a few more days," I replied. "Then I'll return to the city and prepare for school." He nodded. "Our home is always open." For half a month I stayed quietly in the village. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving for good. I spent my days helping in the kitchen, shelling peanuts, chopping wood, sweeping leaves. The simple routine soothed me. No Mira. No Elise. No cold glances. No pretending. Just quiet. Just peace. Then one morning it was time. Mrs. Wong packed me a small cloth bag with rice cakes and dried plum candies. Mr. Wong insisted on walking me to the village entrance. As we reached the bend in the road, I felt the weight of a small envelope slip into my bag. Later, on the bus, I found it, 2 crisp 100 yuan notes. They hadn't said a word about it. I cried quietly for the entire first hour of the ride. When I reached the apartment, the first thing I did was mark 15 large red X's on the calendar. The days had vanished while I was gone. Only 4 remained. Just 4 more until I left for good. As I carried my bag to the bedroom, the door swung open behind me. "You're back." Caleb's voice sounded half relieved, half surprised. But it wasn't him I noticed first. It was Mira. She gave me a brief nod, then walked straight past me into my room. My room. A moment later she returned, leaving my neatly packed belongings in a careless pile on the floor. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Myra's place had a bad leak during the rain. I let her stay here temporarily. And you thought it was fine to clear out my room without asking me?" He winced. "I moved your things into my room. You can stay there for now." He opened the door to his room as if this was a reasonable compromise. As if I hadn't just unbound myself from him in front of 5 elders. "Where are your books?" he asked suddenly, looking around the small bundle on the floor. "Why is there so little here?" "I sold them," I said. "Didn't see the point in keeping them." He frowned. "Even after exams they're useful." I said nothing. And in that silence, the final piece of me that still felt tied to this place quietly unraveled. I didn't belong here anymore. I had the paper to prove it. The red X on the calendar stared back at me like a countdown to liberation. 4 more days. That's all I needed to endure. Just 4 days and I would be gone. On a train to Westwood, surrounded by strangers, books and possibility. I would no longer have to hear Myra's laughter echoing down the hallways of this apartment like it belonged to her. I would no longer have to tiptoe around Elise's tantrums or Caleb's quiet indifference. I clung to that thought as I stepped over my own displaced belongings now carelessly piled near the shoe rack. I bent down, picked up my university acceptance letter, slightly bent at the corner and smoothed it out between my palms. It was still clean. Still sacred. Inside the apartment, I heard laughter. Myra's high-pitched giggle and Elise's feet pounding across the wooden floor like a storm that only targeted my sanity. When I entered the living room, Mira was practicing a dance routine in a flowing white dress. Her movements were elegant, theatrical. She must have been preparing for another performance. Her limbs cut through the air as she twirled, eyes half closed as if the apartment itself were her stage. Meanwhile, Elise used Caleb's bed like a trampoline, bouncing up and down with sticky hands and loud shrieks. Every time she landed, the frame let out a weak creak and my head throbbed with the noise. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a mockery of one. I picked up my kettle and walked outside to fetch water, needing air, space, sanity. Outside the night was cool and forgiving. The concrete beneath my feet was still warm from the afternoon sun, and the sky above was cloudless for once. As I stood there with my kettle trying to let the air rinse away the bitterness inside me, I heard a voice. "Leah." It was Mrs. Hu from next door, holding her own kettle and a half-eaten fried dumpling in her hand. "Back from the village already?" she asked. "Yes," I said simply. She stepped closer, looked over her shoulder toward my apartment, then leaned in like she was sharing state secrets. "You're letting her stay with you?" I didn't have to ask who she meant. "She's been walking around like she owns the place," Mrs. Hu said, clicking her tongue. "One day she's airing out your bedding on the balcony like it's hers. The next she's telling people you invited her out of pity." I froze. "What?" "That's what people are saying," she continued. "That Myra's staying with you because you insisted. Said you felt sorry for her. That it was your idea to bring her and her daughter in after the leak." The water boiled over inside me. Caleb had used me as a shield. To protect himself from rumors, he'd spun the story in Myra's favor. Again. Because Mira was delicate. Mira was innocent. Mira needed someone to blame. Why not me? "Throw her out," Mrs. Hu said, voice blunt. "I would. You think she's just borrowing your room? Please. She's borrowing your life." I didn't respond. I nodded politely and walked back in silence. She wasn't wrong. Inside, the apartment was quiet again. Mira had gone to bed early, and Elise was curled up beside her in my room. Caleb's door was cracked open, but he didn't say anything as I passed. In the bathroom, I found the full extent of the invasion. My soap was shoved into a corner. My towel, damp and smelling of mildew, was hanging near the trash bin. The counter was covered with Myra's skincare, hair accessories, 2 toothbrushes, a child's bubblegum toothpaste, and a bottle of rose-scented lotion that made my eyes sting. I swallowed the bitterness and walked in anyway. As I was brushing my teeth, Elise burst in behind me. "Auntie, I need to use the toilet." Before I could even step aside, she shoved me hard. My head hit the wooden doorframe with a dull thud. Pain lanced through my skull and stars danced across my vision. I clutched the sink to steady myself, the taste of blood faint in the back of my throat. Mira appeared behind her a moment later, looking serene. "Sister-in-law," she said gently, "could you move? You're blocking the way." Her voice was smooth, polite, even soft, but her eyes glittered with something far uglier. Contempt. Triumph. I straightened and turned to her, slow and deliberate. "Apologize." Mira blinked as if the request were foreign. Even Elise stopped moving. Then Elise's eyes narrowed. "You're bad. You're a mean auntie. You pushed me," she wailed, her voice rising into sharp, piercing cries. Caleb came running from the other room, panic on his face. "What's going on?" "She shoved me," Elise cried, running into his arms. "She hurt me." I stood in the doorway, still holding the back of my head where it throbbed. Mira stepped forward, her face full of wounded kindness. "It's my fault," she said. "Elise needed the bathroom and I asked Leah to move. Maybe things just got a little heated." Caleb looked at me. Not at my injury. Not at the small drop of blood behind my ear. Just at Elise, still sobbing, still holding onto his neck like he was her hero. He turned to me with frustration. "She's a child, Leah. You could have been more understanding." My mouth opened slightly. I felt lightheaded. From the knock or the betrayal, I wasn't sure. "I'll sleep in the living room tonight," I said quietly. I started gathering my bedding, but Caleb grabbed my arm. "The bed is there," he said. "Why sleep in the living room?" I pulled my arm away. "She's just a child," he repeated. "Mira didn't mean anything by it either. She's had it hard. Why make it worse for her?" I stared at him. "Did you tell people I invited them here?" I asked calmly. He looked startled. "What? That Mira is only staying because I asked her to?" He hesitated for a beat too long. I laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was the sound of something cracking. "You know," I said, turning to him. "Earlier your daughter went through my things. Do you know what Mira said when I asked her to stop? She said I had no right. That even if I married you, I'd never win against her." His expression twisted. "She's not my daughter." "She might as well be." I didn't wait for a response. I picked up my bag and bedding and left. That night, I booked a room at the cheapest hotel in the neighborhood. 21 yuan for 3 nights. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. No laughter. No stomping. No red dresses twirling in my kitchen. As I unpacked, I found a single piece of plain stationery at the bottom of my bag. I sat on the edge of the bed and began writing a letter to Caleb. Not to blame him. Not to argue. Just to explain. I thanked him for paying for my school supplies over the past few years. I let him know that the engagement had been annulled while I was gone. I told him that I had been accepted to Westwood Technical University, and that from now on, our paths would never cross again. Halfway through writing, there was a knock at the door. I froze. I hadn't told anyone where I was. I opened the door slowly, only to see Caleb standing there, disheveled and panting, as if he had run all over town to find me. "Thank God," he said, stepping inside uninvited. "You're okay. That's all that matters." I stood frozen. He looked around the room, then at my packed bag. "You're really going, huh?" I didn't answer. He bent down and began packing my things for me. "Come home," he said. "We'll talk later. Just come home." I reached for the letter on the desk, ready to fold it and hide it. But his eyes fell on something else. The silver bracelet. He picked it up slowly, recognition dawning on his face. This belonged to my mother." I stayed silent. His expression changed. "She gave this to you?" He looked at it a moment longer then smiled faintly. I guess she wanted you to have it. Makes sense. We're getting married soon anyway. I said nothing. My fingers clutched the strap of my bag. He stood up and touched my arm. Look, I know things have been tense. Elise, she's young. Myra's emotional. But you know they don't mean anything by it. I looked up at him. And all I saw was someone who believed that being chosen by him was the greatest thing that could ever happen to me. I'm not going back, I said. His face paled. I'm serious, I added. I've already said goodbye. He took a step back. Fine. Stay here for a few days. Think it over. I'll come back before the weekend. Maybe we can fix this. Then he turned and walked out, shoulders tense. The moment the door shut, I sat down slowly. I didn't cry. I simply reached for my calendar, pulled out the pen from my bag and marked the day with another heavy red X. 3 more to go. I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed, the scratchy comforter pulled tight beneath me, a blank page in my lap. The farewell letter had started easily enough. Thank you for everything over the past few years. You supported me through school, paid for my books and never asked for anything in return. That kindness deserves acknowledgement. Then I paused. The words blurred. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what I wanted to say and wasn't sure if he deserved to read it. I had spent 3 years under his roof, watched my life shrink around Myra's routines and Elise's noise, listened to neighbors whisper behind my back that I was the jealous one. And through it all, Caleb stood there, quiet, passive, complicit. I glanced over at the silver bracelet lying beside my notebook. The symbol of a childhood engagement that had once meant everything. Now it was just a piece of metal that kept me tethered to someone who never truly saw me. I picked up my pen again. The engagement has been annulled. I already went to the council and gave back the tokens. I've been accepted to Westwood Technical University. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I hesitated before writing the final lines. You don't need to look for me. Our lives are no longer entangled. Please don't mistake my silence for indecision. I set the pen down and closed the notebook. That was all he needed to know. Anything more would only invite more excuses. More guilt. More pretending. A knock sounded at the door. I frowned. I hadn't told anyone where I was staying, except for Mrs. Zhao, my former teacher, who helped me get the train ticket. And she would never. Another knock. Then a voice. Leah. It's me. My pulse ticked up, not from nerves but from exhaustion. I opened the door halfway, blocking the view with my body. He looked like he hadn't slept. His usually neat collar was askew, and there was a light sheen of sweat across his forehead. A man who thought he was saving someone when in fact he was still trying to control them. I finally found you, he said with relief. Are you okay? I didn't answer. He took that as permission and stepped inside. The room suddenly felt small. My neatly folded bag sat on the chair, the letter face down on the nightstand. And the silver bracelet, forgotten until now, still lay in full view. His eyes went to it immediately. He picked it up gently, thumb brushing the tiny etched characters on the inner edge. Why do you have this? He asked. I stayed quiet. He looked at me with a flicker of realization. My mom gave this to you? She gave it to me before the engagement was formalized, I said carefully. Before everything changed. Caleb smiled faintly as if the gesture proved something. Well, then keep it. We're getting married soon anyway. What's mine is yours, right? I flinched at the casual assumption. I'm not coming back, I said plainly. His smile faded. Don't be like that. Look, I know things got a little out of hand. Elise shouldn't have gone through your things. I talked to Mira. She was just emotional. She told me, I cut in, that even if I married you I'd never win against her. His mouth opened slightly. She said it to my face, I continued. While you were out comforting her daughter. While my belongings were scattered across the floor. While your goddaughter turned my acceptance letter into a paper airplane. He looked genuinely shocked. I didn't know, he said after a moment. She wouldn't. She did, I said. And you enabled it. Caleb took a step closer. She's going through a hard time, Leah. You know what happened with her husband. Her husband had other comrades, I snapped. Why didn't they take care of her the way you do? Why didn't they move her into their homes and defend her over their own fiancés? His face turned red but he didn't respond. You always made me feel like I was second place in my own life, I said, voice steady. You told yourself you were noble, that you were helping a widow. But let's call it what it is, you wanted her. You chose her again and again, and you let me take the blame for it. I never wanted to hurt you, he whispered. But you did. Repeatedly. The silence stretched between us. He ran a hand through his hair, agitated. Hey, maybe I didn't handle things right. Maybe I got used to you always being there, waiting. Maybe I took you for granted. But this doesn't have to be permanent. Just come home. Let's fix this. You think this is about fixing it? I asked, almost laughing. You think this is a rough patch? I've never stopped thinking of you as my future, he said, desperate now. We can still go to the Civil Affairs Bureau next week. I'll set the date. I stared at him. Then I picked up the letter from the nightstand, folded it neatly and slid it into my bag. That letter was meant for you, I said. But I realize now, it's not worth giving. He reached for my wrist. Leah. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the box with the others. Then I took the box, walked to the edge of campus and fed the whole thing to the fire barrel the custodians used to burn outdated notices and old exam papers. The flame devoured every page, every signature, every false promise. I stood there until the ashes curled like feathers into the wind. That night I walked into the engineering building and submitted my application to join the National 2011 Research Project, an elite development initiative only offered to top students. I didn't know if I would be accepted, but I knew I was never going back. A year had passed. Spring returned to campus in quiet strokes, petals blooming along the sidewalks, final-year students rehearsing for graduation, the familiar rustle of textbooks and open windows. I no longer flinched when I heard Caleb's name in my thoughts. He had stopped writing months ago and the silence felt like closure. The wound had healed into something dull and distant. I spent my days buried in design simulations and fieldwork reports. Evenings were reserved for the library, the lab, or the rare shared dinner with classmates. They sometimes teased me for being too serious, but I didn't mind. I was where I wanted to be, for the first time in both my lives. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrived. One I didn't expect. The envelope was familiar. So was the neat handwriting on the front. Caleb Hart. I stood frozen for a moment. I hadn't seen his name in nearly half a year. It had taken him that long to stop writing, and now, just as I had stopped looking back, he surfaced again. I opened the envelope without ceremony. The letter was shorter than the ones he used to send. His words lacked the false certainty, the quiet command. Instead, it began with something I never thought I'd hear from him. Leah, I'm sorry. 3 words. And for once they felt honest. I kept reading. It took me too long to understand what I did to you. You were right. About everything. Mira found my transfer application. When I told her I wanted to be near you, she cried, begged, and then disappeared for 2 days. I thought she had gone to her family. What she did instead was file an anonymous report against me. I blinked. He continued. The allegations were vague, just enough to cause suspicion, not enough to be proven. There was no official charge, and since you had already left, no one asked for your statement. But the damage was done. My superiors told me to lay low. Mira lost her job over it. Her family accused me of ruining her reputation. I was forced to marry her to shut it all down. I stared at the letter, my hands cold. In the end, Mira had pulled the final string. And Caleb, in all his passivity, let her. I didn't understand back then why you kept crossing off the days on the calendar in red. I thought you were counting down to our wedding. Now I know. You were marking your way out. He ended the letter with no plea. No, come back. No, wait for me. Just, I hope you're happy. I really do. I never deserved you. I sat very still. For a long moment I simply let the words settle. He finally saw the truth. But it didn't matter anymore. What good was clarity when it came too late? I placed the letter on my desk and retrieved the small tin box I kept at the back of my closet. Inside it were the untouched envelopes Caleb had sent over the first semester, each one containing 100 yuan. I had never spent a single bill. Quietly, I bundled the money together, then wrote a short note to my former teacher. Please forward this to someone who needs it more. Consider it repayment. Leah. I slid the bills into the envelope and sealed it. As for the letter, I took it out to the back of the dorm, where a metal barrel stood filled with crumpled scrap paper and dry leaves. The custodians used it to burn trash on cold evenings. I watched the letter curl and blacken in the flames, the handwriting dissolving into smoke. When it was gone, I walked back inside without a word. 2 weeks later, I received my official offer letter from the National 2011 Engineering Development Project. I was being recruited to join a long-term industrial design initiative in partnership with the state. It was everything I had hoped for. Everything I had sacrificed for. I packed my things once again, this time not to run away but to step forward. I shared a quiet farewell dinner with my roommates. Min cried a little. "You're the quietest person I know," she said, "and somehow the strongest." I smiled at that. Not because I believed her, but because I finally believed in myself. On my last night in the dorm, I took down the calendar I had brought with me from the city. The one where I had once marked red excess for every day I survived. I flipped to the current month. It was blank. No excess. No countdowns. Just space. Just possibility. I folded the calendar carefully and placed it in my bag, not as a memento of pain, but as a reminder of how far I had come. And how far I could go. Caleb Hart. Regret doesn't scream. It settles. Quietly. Like dust in the corners of an empty room, like mildew on letters never opened. Some days I sit in this old armchair by the window and stare at the street below, trying to remember when I first started losing everything. Maybe it was the day Leah packed her things and disappeared from that hotel. Maybe it was the day I chose silence over action. Or the moment I convinced myself that doing nothing was the same as doing the right thing. The truth is, I don't know when I lost her. Only that I did. And once she was gone, my world never stitched itself back together. After the wedding to Mira, everything unraveled faster than I expected. She had won, or at least she thought she had. The scandal quieted and her family paraded the marriage like a triumph. But inside our home it was already crumbling. Mira was no longer the poised widow with sorrowful eyes and poetic words. She was anxious, restless, demanding. She clung to me like a drowning woman and resented me for every breath she had to take without my attention. She searched my phone, watched my movements, even accused me of keeping in touch with Leah, though I hadn't received a single response since the day I left that hotel. Her paranoia turned to bitterness. Bitterness turned to rage. And rage turned into something even more hollow. She began blaming Elise's tantrums on me. "She was fine before you married me," she'd say. "Now she's wild, confused. Because of your fiancé. Because of your Leah." She said her name like a curse. And yet I never corrected her. Because in truth, Leah had become a ghost in our home. Not because she haunted me but because I haunted myself. Everything reminded me of her. The calendar with no markings. The silver bracelet I retrieved from the trash kept locked in a drawer. The silence in our bedroom. The absence of laughter. I had built a life with the wrong person hoping it would somehow feel right with time. It never did. My career slowed to a crawl. The scandal had tainted my file, even if it hadn't stuck publicly. Promotions passed me by. My colleagues distanced themselves. I became a reliable footnote in meetings, dependable but no longer rising. At home, Myra's bitterness hardened into resignation. She stopped performing. Stopped smiling. Started criticizing everything. The way I folded shirts, the way I chewed my food, the way I spoke too softly when I answered Elise's questions. Our daughter was the only light I held on to. Elise grew up quickly, too quickly. By 16 she had Myra's charm and none of her caution. By 20 she had married a man I didn't approve of. A flashy salesman with expensive shoes and empty eyes. "He's all flash, no spine," I told Mira. "Don't start," she said. "You have no right to judge anyone's choices." The irony burned in her mouth but she never took it back. Elise's husband cheated, drank and hit her. Repeatedly. She ran away more than once. Each time I tried to bring her back. But Mira stopped me. "You'll embarrass her," she said. "She'll figure it out." He never did. Until the last time. She was 28 when she died. The note she left behind was short and chillingly simple. "I don't want to keep being someone else's mistake." We buried her next to Myra's parents. Mira didn't speak for 3 days. On the 4th she looked me in the eye and said, "This is your fault. If you had been a better man, maybe she wouldn't have needed to cling to him." Then she packed a suitcase and left. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't even take Elise's baby, a 6-year-old girl who now asks me questions I cannot answer. Where's mommy? Why don't I have a daddy? Grandma said mommy was sad. Were you mean to her? I don't know what to say. Because the truth is I was never enough. Not for Mira, not for Elise, and certainly not for Leah. Especially not for Leah. Sometimes I take out the box from the bottom drawer. The one I've never shown anyone. Inside it is a folded page from Leah's university acceptance letter. I only saw it once. The day Elise turned it into a paper airplane. It landed at my feet. I smoothed it out, saw the seal, and for a second I wanted to tear it apart. Because I knew what it meant. It meant I was no longer part of her future. Sometimes I dream of her, still in that apartment, still marking red X's across the calendar while I sat foolishly beside another woman, pretending it all made sense. In those dreams I walk to her room, open the door and say something, anything, that could make her stay. But I never remember the words. Because in real life I never said them. Years pass differently now. My hair is graying at the temples. My joints ache when it rains. I read books I don't finish. My granddaughter plays with dolls and asks for stories I don't have the strength to invent. But every so often when she's asleep I sit by the window and wonder. Where's Leah now? Does she ever think of me? Does she remember the version of me that held her hand behind the school gate, that walked her home with a backpack full of shared secrets? Or does she only remember the man who stood by while someone else stole everything she built? I used to believe that love could endure anything. Now I know the truth. Love doesn't survive betrayal. It survives choice. And I made the wrong one, over and over again, until there was nothing left to save. The last time I saw her, really saw her, she stood in that hotel room with her acceptance letter in one hand and a bag packed at her feet. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just looked at me like she'd already buried the part of her that used to love me. And she had. That's what I remember most. Not the things she said. But the silence that came after. Because regret isn't loud. It doesn't claw or scream. It waits. And in the end it stays longer than love ever did. The end.